So as you mentioned, it is similar to an approval of a CUP that you did last year. Um, But in the time since that approval was done, the original applicant removed himself from the application, and then the conditions were not completed, so it did, the effective land use authority approval expired after a year, so they are coming back to, sorry, I'm trying to bring this up on the map, to renew that with some slight changes to the CUP. The main one being that the previous request was for a major telecommunication facility that would broadcast TV and internet. Currently, it is just going to be, their current request is just for a internet service, a wireless internet service provider, and a relay for their other stations. So there is not too much different, as I mentioned. The other reason that they are coming back in, as you may recall, is this is already constructed, so they're trying to bring it into compliance. And the conditions of approval themselves are similar to the ones from last year. I don't think there's much of a change or difference. So this is the Nautica subdivision just south of Hiram Dam. And you can see the property owners, the Fritzes, have this property with their home above, and then below on the other side of the county road, they have another portion of the property, and that has the facility on it. So they have come in previously to get the public infrastructure overlay zone approved for that facility. And again, as I mentioned, the previous CUP expired, and this is just renewing that for an internet service provider only. There is a county road here, the 1600 West, you can see, and that would be the access to here. It appears that it might meet the width requirement for a county road, but it won't be able to be determined probably until springtime if or what improvements would need to be done on that road. But they will work with the county engineer on that. And as for, I guess the one thing I would notice is, again, because we won't know till winter, because winter maintenance is not provided on this road. So if they did ever need to access the facility during the winter for maintenance, they would need to coordinate with Public Works Department to clear that road for them, and then they would be billed for those services. And with that, staff is recommending approval with the conditions. And if you have any questions, just let me know.
Scenario, are they able to clear the road themselves? Or
No, we don't allow private persons to clear county roads.
And the only other question I had was, other commissioners, not members, was more or less like, was there a particular condition that they weren't able to meet, or just timing-wise, it just didn't work?
No, I think they're able to meet most of them. I think the concern, I think the applicant in his withdrawal letter said something about there was maybe some liability with the television broadcast part of the facility, and he didn't want to take on that potential liability, so he wanted to remove
So
himself
it
from
wasn't
it.
a situation, problem achieving
No.
the condition. Commissioners, questions for staff?
Was there a cell tower in the same area? I'm trying to remember back. We did dozens of these at one time, and it seemed like there was one in the same location. Or am I-
That comes out
Just-
for an extension.
Another one in this area is not coming to mind. But yeah, this is the one that we've had most.
Closer to the dam.
Yeah, so here's, if I zoom out, here's the dam here. This is the location. Yeah, that
That's
was,
the one I was thinking of.
that's the one that's expired.
Seen it at least once.
Yeah, so that's the. None? Yeah,
Let's see.
yeah, if you'd like to come up and, I don't know if any commissioners have any questions for you. You're not required to say anything, but if you have any questions on any of
one thing that I did have a question
You'll
on.
have to come up.
Oh,
Knock on the mic.
come up there?
Yeah. Yeah, and state your name for us, please.
Over here.
Yes.
My name is Derek Hardy. I'm the head infrastructure for Airband. The road, 1600 West going up there is like it's like a four-wheeler trail. It's not a real road. So I don't know what conditions, because technically where the tower, since the tower is already there, we do not need to get vehicles to that location. So we technically don't even need a road. I can park at Stephen Fritz's driveway and walk to the tower, because all we're doing now is maintenance and anything else like that. So I don't know what requirements we would need for that road, if that was something, I just wanted to bring it up, I don't know.
And I think it's an unknown for the county engineer at this point too, but I think before it may have met the width requirement, but may have not been the all-weather surface that it needed to be. So that is something you can discuss with the engineer. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it tonight.
Awesome, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the Fritz Tower conditional use permit 2022 with this company, 8 conditions and 3 conclusions.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the Fifth Tower CUP 2022 with 8 conditions and 3 conclusions. Any other questions, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is a public hearing for the Denali South rezone, and we'll begin that discussion with presentation from staff.
Yes, so this is a rezone request. Bring up the location on the map. To go to an RU5 zone from the A10 agricultural zone. If approved, it would allow the parcel to be legally divided into 2 lots as part of a subdivision process instead of just a single buildable lot that it is right now. This one may be familiar to you as well. It was part of a subdivision amendment to take it out of this larger Bailey Acres subdivision, and then they came back and had to do their own 1-lot subdivision, the Denali Horse Ranch South subdivision, I believe it was called, or rezone, in order to, no, subdivision, I was right, in order to come out of that subdivision, because there was enough density in the subdivision to support the remaining lots, but we could not allow the kind of property coming out of the subdivision to be a orphan parcel, per se. And so that's why the 1-lot subdivision was required. And now they're coming in for the rezone of that 1-lot subdivision with the ag remainder here, with the house, and then the remainder to do a second lot. So they are currently legal parcels, having gone through that history. As far as context and what is surrounding, there are 6 adjacent parcels to the subject property with homes with an average lot size of 3.6 acres. When you expand that buffer to a quarter mile, there's 25 parcels with a home at 6.8 acres average. And then half a mile buffer, there's 40 parcels with an average size of 8.3 acres on properties with a home. Sensitive areas, there's actually not a lot of sensitive areas shown on this, but if any did crop up as part of the subdivision process, that would be addressed then. But there does not appear to be anything that would take away from their net developable acreage, which would be the steep slopes, wetlands, things like that. The nearest RU5 zone is located approximately 5 miles away on the west side of Mendon. You may recall it's the Martin Bench subdivision. another rezone that was approved a couple months ago. But it is, like I said, about 5 miles away on the west side of Mendon, not immediately adjacent to the boundary, but close to. That was 34.6 acres, and it did have a number of sensitive areas that limited the development potential, which is why they were looking for the RU5 zone there. And so that was approved, and they are coming in next month for a subdivision on that one. Sorry, I am just lost. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay. There is also a RU2 zone immediately adjacent to the property. So this is RU2. Here's the subject property area that we're looking at. This was approved in 2014 as the Rose Hills subdivision rezone. It was an existing 2-lot subdivision on 11 and a half acres. Subdivision amendment was later done in 2014 to create one additional lot, but they have not added any lots since that rezone. I really have to pull out to get to that. This is that Martin Bench RU5 over here. And again, context-wise, the subject property we're looking at is here. These are other RU2 zones that were approved immediately adjacent to Mendon within the last couple of years. Oh, sure. Dead center.
Exactly
Yeah.
midway between those.
Yeah, I think I may have even called out as the crow flies, how far away they are from each other. But yeah, it was pretty much. Mendon is actually further away at 1.9 miles. Wellsville is 1.6 miles, but it is in the Mendon City annexation area, future annexation area. But yeah, since it was not immediately adjacent, they didn't need a letter from Mendon. As far as the access to the property, and I don't know if this is helpful, I might keep doing this in the future, but I've added some of the pictures that the county engineer has taken of the existing road. It has frontage along Highway 23, but then also the county road 3400 South. And the image that you see on page 4 there is from 3400 South looking west. It is.
I found this extremely
Oh, okay. And the table as well, yeah. So.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Yeah.
that was super
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. I don't know why this didn't dawn on me years ago.
I think that's great to have that information.
So again, it helps you to, instead of having to go back and forth in the report, to figure out what the requirements are and what's existing, just side by side. Yeah. So as you can see, 3400 South there. The required width for a minor local road is 20 feet. Existing is 12 to 16, so it is substandard there. The right-of-way is fine, but the paved and gravel shoulders are substandard as well as the clear zone, and the structure is poor. So if this were approved and a subdivision came back through, there would likely be road improvements along there that would be required. Or I guess it would be a subdivision amendment. Fire did not have any comments except to say that access and driveways need to be 20 feet wide. They would also need to provide a place for refuse collection for the new lot. I haven't received any comments from the public on this, and staff is not making a recommendation, but has provided recommendations of either approval or denial, depending on how you would want to proceed on that. And that's everything for me. If you have any questions for staff.
Questions for staff? Commissioners?
Second. Aye.
Yes. Come on
My name is David Rupp. I'm the agent acting on behalf of Byron and Beth Pugh, the owners. So as far as one thing, I think Angie did a good job covering the staff report. I just have a digital copy here. There is an existing access, and if she said this, I missed it, but on page 1 of her report, she shows there's a home to the north, Dave and Denise Pearson. So there's an existing shared access into this property currently. So
Off of which?
off of the highway, right there where Angie moved the cursor.
Is that just a driveway?
That's probably a 25-foot wide paved driveway existing to that home, and it's shared. When it was originally set up under Bailey Acres, yeah, there you can see it better, but
Back to the north or south?
yeah, it's north of the property.
So that's an approved UDOT.
It's an approved UDOT access that we maintained or reestablished when we went through this first step of this 3-step process. So that would likely, that's just for information, that would likely be the access for their family that is wanting to build a home on this parcel. That's the idea of the rezone. No, not unless you have questions for me.
Questions for Mr. Rupp? I think the only thing I would point out is just, from the city engineer's comments on the substandard road conditions. The next phase of subdivision, as you come in, that's when those types of needs to be addressed.
Right, and we've had some conversations with Matt
Yeah.
about that, and so we've kind of talked back and forth, and I think there's an understanding of what needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Is there anyone here who'd like to comment on this item tonight? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Last chance.
Motion to close the public hearing.
discussion. This is a actual notice public hearing. We've done some additional analysis as staff. I think the applicants also looked at, an attempt to respond to some of the questions that were posed in the last meeting's discussion. And those include questions about what are other counties doing with regards to right-of-way and what might it look like and what might the effect be overall. And so I'd just like to first, let's get this. There we go. This graphic was provided in your packet folder. And I think this is helpful to at least understand potential difference between calculating density as net, which is our current county ordinance on the left. This is a depiction of hypothetical 310 gross acres on the left and the right. It's the identical area in terms of acreage and size. In the left diagram, you see the right-of-way area taken out, which is just over 19 acres, resulting in about 290 net acres.
During all the fluster, I believe I forgot to turn them all on, so talk loud, everybody.
Okay, and so dividing that net acreage, 290 by the 10 in the A10 results in 29 homes, and those are depicted. And you'll note that they're on a variety of lot sizes. Some are smaller than 10 acres, some are larger than 10 acres. And that's allowable in a subdivision, or that's sometimes the case that we have 2006 or earlier parcel configurations that are less than 10 acres and they qualify as a buildable lot in the A10 zone, at least potentially, given other development standards to be met. So the potential proposal for amending the code is to calculate density based on the gross acreage. And so in this case, even though there are 19.4 right-of-way acres, the density calculation is 310 gross acres divided by 10, resulting in the 31 homes, which is just an increase of 2 homes over 310 acres. You'll note that between the current density calculation in our code compared to the proposed left to right, the difference in net lot size or average lot size is 10 acres to 9.35 acres. Angie and I were just discussing this a little earlier today, and we noted that a lot of new roads are, the majority of what we see in subdivisions are private, and private roads are not deducted from the density calculation. So this diagram doesn't differentiate between public versus private, but one could imagine that many of these could be, in which case, yeah. Example that brought this to our attention is, on a public road.
Yep. But even if hypothetically this was all new development with new public right-of-way or existing public right-of-way and dedication of additional width to meet the 66-foot standard, then this is the difference that you see. So what kind of confirms what we anticipated, it wouldn't be so detectable. And we're not presenting an RU5 or an RU2 analysis of this. I think in part because what we tend to see is smaller applications of those zones. Our sense is that A10 is a safe assumption for calculating gross density. We have less certainty or conclusion for a recommendation related to the RU5 and the RU2. I'll just also note, here is the developable acreage definition. Land area within a subdivision excluding areas defined as undevelopable under Chapter 1718 sensitive areas and areas dedicated to the public such as parks and public rights-of-ways. Now, I also added, just in my work this week on this, the definition of density, which at the end of that density
it gets into a little more detail. I'll just read the whole definition. The number of net acres required per dwelling unit, as specified in table 171040. Net acreage shall be calculated by taking the total gross acreage and subtracting non-developable sensitive areas that list the wetlands, open water, steep slopes, and the areas in rights of way for roads. So both of these definitions would really need to be touched on for congruency between them. And so I think one proposal was just to eliminate the areas dedicated to public, such as parks, rights of way in that A10, or in all zones. But we would also invite discussion on and comments related to this amendment, potential amendment, which is that in the developable acreage definition, you see the last part of that states areas dedicated to the public, such as parks and public rights of ways, are also excluded in the RU5 and RU2 zoning districts, which would mean currently the sensitive land areas would apply to A10, RU5, and RU2 in any zone district. And in a density definition, concluding with the area and rights of ways for roads in the RU2 and RU5 zone districts, so that the A10 would be excluded from that. So that's some new information that I think we only noticed developable acreage and not the density, so this might need to be continued for, or renoticed rather, but at any rate, wanted to bring as much information as possible for this hearing and invite the commission to respond or discuss any questions we might answer, and might want to hear from the applicant as well.
That one, but the developable acreage, I mean, we've properly noticed, and we can take action on that one. It's the developable acreage.
Correct.
We're more of a discussion than maybe item 9 on our agenda. So let me ask a question, and then others can chime in. What's the, go to your next slide. What's the purpose of the one that had the language on the RU2 and RU5?
There we go.
Yeah, what's the purpose of pointing out those zones specifically?
Well, it's so as to, if,
It applies to all zones now, right? This is
correct.
just really pointing those out, right? Or am I misunderstanding?
Right, it's just that in our analysis, we feel confident in recommending that A10 would be appropriate as a gross calculation for density. We're less confident in the RU2 and RU5. And separating them so that RU5 and RU2 remain as calculating the density after deducting the right-of-way. So it's more of a net density calculation. Now,
In the previous iteration, the previous slide, if you will, it's still all of them, right?
removes the, yeah, it'd be a gross density calculation for all zone districts. Now, I will say that I think,
Yeah, I mean, I would be too. It doesn't concern me.
So few of them.
Other zones, but.
yeah, I think that the RU2 and RU5, just in the past several months that I've observed rezone requests, that seems to be a greater comfort level for a small split here or a small subdivision there, but get to a certain scale and there seems to be less comfort with it.
I think, yeah, ever since those zones were formed, I think we have mostly a consistent approach on those, yeah, as far as what we approve and what we don't approve, and that goes to the council.
Yeah,
Even on your bigger note there, right, the original one, instead of 2 more homes, if that was going to 5, you would get 4 more?
yeah, you get 5 more with an RU5,
Really not gonna even change that.
and I didn't do
I
it.
don't think we're gonna approve on that big for 300 acres going to 5.
Okay.
I don't think, that's my opinion.
Yep, I think we could respect that. We just weren't prepared to put a full recommendation for the 2 and the 5. But given that the track record seems to be that there's small applications here and there rather than a large development trend in the county, and certainly the draft general plan going to council in a few weeks is suggesting a kind of a different approach, a density bonus approach to larger scale development and conservation.
Just for clarification, what you presented and discussed, is that part of item 9 on the agenda, or is it separate? Okay, so it's separate. Just making sure. Other questions for staff? Sure.
Why did we bring parks into this? I mean, RU295 is normally county. Can you tell me how many parks are in the county? Not many, so.
Never.
But, you know, I was considering that, I saw that and where parks were included. And in my experience around the state, I deal with a lot of public entities, and I've seen many situations where somebody has a piece of property, and part of their development of that property is they dedicate a certain portion of that to whatever the entity, the city or the county. And as such, they would get a density bonus out of this, but the public get the benefit of having a piece of public infrastructure, a park.
Right now, our county doesn't have a parks department or anything,
Yeah.
so.
Maybe it was aspiration.
Yeah,
I'm just querying that because it seemed different to me. So.
and you think of a potential,
Alarm me, because at a city, we do have parks all the time,
I tend to think of I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I just kind of curious, so we started discussing some of this stuff last month with the 2 parcels out in Wellsville. Is that what brought this discussion?
Yes,
Curious what kind of brings this to the,
that was the impetus of it, and that's the purpose of this graphic, is to say, what if it applied at a larger scale? So that we're not just looking at a one-off, a small scale, but what does it mean more broadly applied, and that's the
You'd almost have to say that the entity who is trying to do the rezone would be the owner of the park, or the one dedicating it to, rather than using an adjacent park, the property that they're trying to develop or whatever, or rezone.
It would have to be part of it.
Exactly. Yes.
And I tend to think of the potential for dedicating a trail easement as part of a development approval, but that, in my mind, would seem to be more of a incentivized through maybe a density bonus, that, hey, you could provide this easement for public trail access, and there's a reward for that
Right.
incentive.
Or in this case, the way it is, we're not taking that away from
Not
you.
punishing.
Yeah,
Yep.
we're not punishing.
Did you check, Tim, with other counties to see what most of the other counties do, or any of the other counties, or they 50-50 across?
It's, the applicant's done some research on that. We did a little looking at Weber County. They do require the reduction of right-of-ways, but others, it's less clear. So I'm not as prepared on that particular item, but maybe applicant and Angie might have more to add there.
So a 10-acre piece seems to be just the standard that parcels were divided into. I mean, don't we have a lot of exactly 10-acre pieces?
You know, it really does vary, and there's tends to be more division of parcels over the decades, South Valley than North Valley. They tend to be smaller parcels. Well, I can't say that too generically, but in parts of the county, there are more divisions that occurred over time than other places. But I don't know that, I think 10's just a natural subdivision of 40, 20, 10,
What
you know.
people have chosen, not necessarily what the state or the county.
It just seemed to be a compatible density for balancing that residential use and agricultural use. And it still seems to be, after many years, seems to be the preferred balance in density, although there seems to be interest to increase that density, but how that density is increased and at what level is much of what our general plan is addressing.
I guess just a thought on that is, this doesn't apply to every development. I mean, it's not going to have an impact in the vast majority of parcels because they have enough acreage, additional acreage. It's, you know, this would be more germane to a situation like we've discussed where they had exactly 10 acres or exactly 20 acres. And so they weren't able, because of the dedication of right of way, to get that second lot.
Yep, or in an RU5, they have 5.2 acres and they have to dedicate 0.25 acres and they're just shy of 5 acres, but people driving by wouldn't notice splitting the right-of-way here that way so much.
But it's probably maybe even more limited in its impact than your general review in what you looked at because of those, you know, very
Likely so. I think that goes back to,
parcel-specific challenges. Yeah.
right, and in particular that we don't see too much dedication of new right-of-way. We see widening of right-of-way, but not so much new right-of-way.
It's been done because of the road manual. I mean, if you go to the county, the right-of-way is 66 feet. So down the road, this does have impact for somebody who is developing a big piece of ground, and it's gonna take off a bunch of ground from them if they're gonna dedicate it, which becomes a problem if you're the piece of ground in front of somebody who wants to develop it. So I'm just wondering if how far we've looked as far as right-of-way and what this is gonna do, because there's a lot of county roads that are not that wide yet.
Yeah.
Most.
Well, I'm kind of thinking what everybody else is thinking. I'm a little more conservative, but I kind of think this is rushing things a little bit. And the other thing of it is what are we doing, or what if we set up a false pretense, just like here it's been 3-4 months ago? We had the applicant come in from Smithfield, goes and buys a piece of property fully with the intent to develop it, not realizing, I mean, they wanted a lower zoning and not realizing the contour of the land, the water there, the springs, whatever else. If we start getting into this kind of stuff, aren't we promoting ourselves as wanting to develop and big development? I didn't really think that's what we wanted.
My sense there, if I could just respond to that, is that the larger development might be how the county chooses to move forward with rezones. Is a rezone going to be an RU5, RU2 trend, or is it going to be more of a density bonus on an A10 that looks at an alternative to A10 density that alternatively provides open space with more cluster development? So those are choices the county has moving forward. I view that as more of a, what is the rezone choice, more so than the density calculation related to right-of-way.
But in that rezone choice, just like was discussed here, it's those sensitive areas are being brought into there because that limits where the development goes, which in that case you're talking about was infringing on other people's water rights because they had filed on those. So I'm in agreement with Brady. There is a lot of things that I think has to be considered. I'm not saying this drags out forever, but right away, I mean, for instance, in the county, there are 2 different width requirements or width things that happen. You go to Petersboro and we've got 50-foot right of way, and we're trying to figure out how that happened versus 66. And you get into those sensitive water areas and things like that. You get to the northern part of Cache County, and you're gonna have a bunch of that. So I see where this is going, but I just hope that there's more discussion and delving into what's going on to that part.
Certainly, the discussion item to follow will focus more on the sensitive land side of the density development equation. And that was requested in our, to start to explore that. And so we have some additional graphics prepared for you related to steep slopes to begin with for this evening. But if we just isolate right-of-way related to how we calculate density, whether it's the net or gross, we're not seeing a substantial difference in our initial analysis here.
Questions for Tim? Thanks, Tim. This is a public hearing, so should open a public hearing. I move to open. Motion and second to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, would the proponent like to come up and address the commission? Thank you. Share any additional information or
Want the graphics, or do you want it?
You're fine to leave them. I don't mind just standing right here. You're
You
okay.
can set the book on here.
Nah, you're okay. I appreciate the opportunity to address the commissioners. Just to make, I was here last month, but so everybody's clear, my name's Seth Tate. I'm an attorney representing the applicant. And so we appreciate your consideration of this. I want to address just a couple of the discussion items. You're all hitting the main points on this, right? I mean, it's an interesting discussion. It's concerning for us for a few reasons. Number one, I think this gets to the heart, and I mentioned this last time, but I really think that what's driving my client's move on this is that it just feels patently unfair to have if you own a 10-acre parcel, maybe you farm that, it's been in your family for 50, 60, 100 years, whatever the case might be, and now it's time to build a house on that. And you're in the A10 zone, so you've got the minimum parcel size, and you go in there and you find out that because you got to give property to the county government, and in the process of exacting that property from you, the county now doesn't include that in your acreage. So it's putting salt in an open wound. Give us your property and we're not going to count it to benefit you. That really seems wrong on a number of levels. The other thing too is I think that the ordinance, I think Mr. Gunnell mentioned, I said, why we got parks in there? And it smacks as this boilerplate language that maybe we took at some point in time in the past and applied it here. I've seen the language in other areas, but nobody can seem to remember why we did that. And there are no parks, as you mentioned, and so we're questioning what the policy was in the first place behind this. And it seems to disincentivize the type of density we want. We know the county has to grow a little bit, and we're trying to, I think as Tim's been talking about, this idea of density bonuses and trying to concentrate density around itself and preserving open space, which is wonderful. And what the current definition of developable acreage does is it disincentivizes these green spaces because it doesn't include them in the developable acreage. So anyway, it's strange. It forces people to go develop parcels that don't have sensitive areas or dedicated open areas or whatever, and you end up taking away good farm ground that otherwise I think could be anyway. So it seems to be a reverse incentive. The other thing too is it just doesn't fit the zone. We're turning the A10 zone into an A11 zone. It's actually what it is, right? And so for the parcels that have 10-acre along the roads, we're not really. My client feels like we decided that 10 acres was a good density. We've got that through a lot of the rural county, but we're really not. In other words, we're kind of cutting against the spirit of the zone by then not counting that acreage. So those are the big concerns. I appreciate Tim's discussion bringing up the other zones, and I realize that this hasn't been analyzed through all zones. And our application was not beyond just the A10 zone. I think there were two proposals. One of the proposals was that it would limit removing rights-of-way just in the A10 zone, so you don't get the impact in the more dense zones. I would agree with Tim. I think the analysis seems different if you're talking an RU2 zone or an RU5. I think I would have to concede that it seems like there might be a difference there. But in the rural areas, as Tim's analysis showed you, there really is no impact as far as density goes, even on a 300-plus acre parcel. It's minuscule. And so I think that it's a way to fix what appears to be an unfairness without really altering the density in the rural areas. And my client's happy with, they'd be perfectly fine limiting this to A10 zone if you had concerns about other zones. And so that, I just wanted to address that. I don't, unless there's any questions for me, I think that's what my client wanted me to convey to you. I think we're just trying to fix what seems like it was just a boilerplate language, maybe not meant or with no thought behind it, and it's causing an unfairness that really, I think, can be fixed without much impact on the zone. So, any questions for me that I can address?
There was mentioned that maybe you've done some analysis of other counties.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that. So we went and looked at, I had a law clerk just go poll Box Elder County, Rich County, Weber County. I even looked at some down in central Utah, trying to find comparable counties to the, you know, the density of Cache County. And only Weber County, which I don't think is totally comparable, but it's close, right? Only Weber County had an express language that, you know, exempted or took out rights of way as far as the developable acreage. Rich County, and again, not all of these ordinances are artfully drafted. So I think, as Tim mentioned, there, as you well know, there are always arguments, but as far as clear express language, Weber was the only one that had this. I think Rich County, Box Elder County seems to only take out existing rights of way, and it counts acreage that would go towards proposed dedications. So seeming to kind of cut and address that unfairness factor there. Rich doesn't really, I sent language to Tim. Some of the language is kind of hard to understand. Even when we called the staff, they're kind of like, oh, this has never come up over here, so we don't know what to tell you. They didn't have, there's some language in Rich County that talks about undevelopable areas, but that doesn't really define what those are, and staff really didn't have much experience in what that meant. So maybe you could argue that undevelopable area means areas that are going to be dedicated, but it doesn't expressly use roads or rights of way in the language. So I thought that was interesting. I'm sure we could go into other counties throughout the state, but we didn't see anything that caused us concern. But I don't know, Tim, if you looked at that language and felt differently.
Well, it just looked like there were different ways of defining it. To me, in any ordinances I've ever worked on, the proof is in the application of the text, and whether it's building code standards for urban design or density standards in rural areas, drawing it up is really, I think, the proof in the pudding, which is why we tried to provide that analysis. And the small difference is what I would lean back to. And I just wonder, Seth, if you have any thoughts about this additional definition of density and maintaining congruency between these.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up. I hadn't noticed that.
We discovered it a little late, so.
Yeah, and I wish we'd discovered it before we noted the hearing up, but I agree with you. So nothing's more frustrated when you're in court and you're trying to argue a piece of code and then there's another definition that conflicts and it's like, what were we doing? So I completely agree that other definitions that may be relevant should be made to be congruent, and if we need to notice up the hearing, my client's not thrilled to have more delay, but I do think if you're gonna do it, you need to do it right. We want to make sure that the code is congruent all the way through. So I actually don't have any concern. I agree with you that we need to change both definitions so at least they harmonize with each other, and that we don't create any, I guess, ambiguity or suggestion that our intent was something other than what we're trying to accomplish here. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, but sometimes I talk too much. But any other questions I could address? All right. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else here would like to speak on this item? Last chance. Right, move that we close the public hearing. Second. Got a motion and second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I think we have certainty around the developable acreage discussion. Maybe a little less certainty on the density item. I suppose if we wanted to be overly cautious, we could bring the density question up next meeting. If
we're concerned about not having properly noticed the change in the density, but, unless others feel differently.
One interesting thing,
Do any broader?
go ahead. First, I didn't hear you. I was just gonna say, one interesting thing around this, even though we haven't dealt with, well, aside from the Mendon or Petersboro subdivision, we haven't dealt with large subdivisions. And in a large subdivision scenario, this would tend to lose itself a lot, be a lot less obvious, but when you start talking 1 or 2 lot subdivision, I think it's gonna be more obvious. The other fact of that too is, I mean, and I know we can't say that, oh, it's been in your family for 100 years and now you wanna get out and sell it, that's fine, but somebody else comes in and buys it 2 years, owned it a year or 2 years and just wants to develop it. Can't differentiate that way, but do we wanna see that happen? Because, you know, it might open up, that corner out there, isn't that just down from your place, no one there? So, granted, that's kind of an unfortunate circumstance, because aren't they surrounded on 2 sides by county road, or just in
Pretty
front?
much, yeah.
So it stings them kind of hard.
But but driving by that, if it's 2 lots or 1 lot, you're not gonna know that they're 2 9.5 acre lots or 2 10 acre lots with a dedicated right of way.
The big thing that, I think Mr. Tate's argument is very compelling, but I still come back to, the land doesn't disappear because it's dedicated. It's still there.
It still looks like that big of a lot.
It's being dedicated to county as a right of way, and known as you've said, most of our county roads do not approach 66 feet. You know, they're 20 feet wide with some shoulders. The majority of this dedication will probably not change in how it looks. It's not gonna change the overall feel, and yeah, I get the argument, hey, you're taking my land, and then you're not giving me credit for it. I see that.
Can I bring up a point? I mean, if you're in A10, just wanna, if you have 80 acres, you can put 8 houses on that, if you can get 8 tens. But as soon as you do that, you've gotta dedicate that footage and do the road improvement and everything else. Now you're less than 80 acres, so you're like at
Yeah, that's
78.
this one here.
Yes.
So you lose 1 lot, essentially.
But,
That's,
which is a pain because you're stuck with developing the road and paying for it. So that's why I'm saying there's some more to this and everything else. I understand it because I own ground and everything else, but then you can go back to those guys who are sitting in front of county roads right now who already gave right of way or had that passed, and it hit them. So I don't know. This is one you almost have to sit and think on it for a while.
Yeah.
I can see the benefit, just like Nate says, you're really not gonna go out there with a measure tape, say,
yeah, you're, I mean,
9.9.
I see it as they explain it, as a taking. The county's taking your ground, you shouldn't be penalized that,
I
because in
don't
the end,
take it
that's
that way.
for the public good, to have that right of way when and if they have to expand that. You know, when they do that, if they do it, because we had to do it when we did my own subdivision. When and if they widen those roads, I'm gonna lose 40 apple trees out of my 250 tree orchard, right? Because now they're in that right of way, they weren't when they were planted 60 years ago. I'll lose those at some point potentially, and you drive them by now, you don't know that they're not part of, they're all covered in Christmas lights right now, so it looks really nice.
But we gotta take, I'll just object a little bit to Nate. I mean, the county isn't in the force of taking. The person came and says, I wanna develop it. So the county's gotta provide services and emergency vehicles and that, so we've got to maintain the proper rights. So we didn't come and take it until you agreed to it.
I agree.
So
But it's the easiest way to get it, right? Because at some point, when you have to widen that road, the people that didn't develop their ground, you're gonna have to take it anyways.
But I can't widen my road unless that guy in front of me who owns the piece is agreeable to it, so.
No, I'm saying when the county has to, if they come through and say, this is gonna be our new thoroughfare, as development happens. I agree, it's the way the county should do it. But I still see it as a landowner,
I would bring up again that most of I heard a scenario of a lot split, 2 or 3 lots and an 80 acre and, 7 or 8 units. But when I picture what their development proposal would likely be, it'd be that they would dedicate additional right-of-way along the public road, and that they might have 1 or 2 edges of the property, depending on the size of the parcel and the location of roads. And then most likely, the roads servicing the lots inside the private area would be private roads, and then they would not lose any density. And so it really comes down most of the time to the additional 30 feet or 20 or how much more they're dedicating, and then it comes down to a very close equation of whether they lose a lot or not.
So when you're doing that, did you take the road manual in consideration? Because once you go over 5, you will hit the county width and requirements and everything else, and so then it does become, because you've now gone above 5 houses, and so I start seeing that part as something too, because the county's saying if you did 6 homes, well, you gotta have at least a 20-foot wide paved road. We didn't go to the 33 or anything yet.
Shouldn't change though, should it, no, because it's 66 feet dedicated anyway, right, no matter what.
Eventually. It depends on how the utilities in that go. The utilities may say you gotta stay out of so many feet, but it's, well, in fact, utilities nowadays, they say you gotta stay out of the county's area. So, I'm just saying, from the road standpoint and everything else, it's certainly something to consider.
Yep.
Everybody's brought up good points, so.
And I think that the road manual projected broadly or at larger scale is what we see here, assuming these are public rights of ways, and again, the density difference doesn't seem substantial. So.
Me personally, I'm comfortable with the proposal, as it pertains to roads and right of way. I feel pretty comfortable in having that not take away from the net acreage.
I am too, I think, if I were looking to buy a piece, because I wanna live in an A10 area, and so then I'm telling a realtor, find me anything that's 10 acres or bigger, and if they happen to find one that's exactly 10 acres, and I spend that money, and then I find out, oh, A10 doesn't work on a 10-acre parcel, that would be frustrating.
Could I add just a point of clarification?
Yeah.
I think you need to actually start with the 20 acre, because if it's a legal parcel and it's 10 acres or less, you can build on it even with the road dedication. So it's when you're creating new lots, like in this scenario, it's a 20 acre piece. They did divide it already without going through subdivision process, but truly it's currently a 20 acre piece. And so they want to create an additional lot, so they have to have that 10 net developable acres per lot in order to create those 2 buildable lots.
Should we put that up there?
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure
That's
that,
really good.
just a 10 acre, you could probably still build on it, but it's when you're creating the lots that density comes into place.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we put your screen up there.
So, just one clarification there. So, like the subdivisions that come here tonight, or one in particular that, well, any of them, it doesn't matter which one they were. If they had, let's just say that an individual has 40 plus, 43, 44 acres, or 41, and they're able to do their right of ways, but if they do a road up through the center or something else, and that diminishes the lots below 10, they've already got approval for 4 houses, so does that hurt them or not?
Would if it went below the 10. If it took more than 1 acre out of those 41, they would only get 3 lots out of that, under the current,
If it's a public road.
yeah, if it's.
Only public.
Yeah.
It's a private
And-
road, that's.
What's interesting, that's a really good scenario, Brady, because the road manual might look at do an analysis of the area, and the Director of Public Works could say that this needs to be a public road because there's other areas that will depend on access through, whereas another property, it's not as significant or not as great of a need to get through there for other properties, and it could just end up being a private road. So there's kind of just depends on where you are and what the need is in terms of public access.
I guess my final question would be planning and zoning. Whether we approve this or whether it gets approved down the road or not, could planning and zoning say in a similar scenario as this, could they come in and say, okay, so here's our deal, plead their case? Could we have well, I guess they'd have to go, they wouldn't be able to do an A10, they'd have to do an RU5. They'd have to rezone.
And then if it's not somewhere we're comfortable with that, we're not gonna approve that rezone, and so yeah, I'd like,
I feel that the impact of this will be fairly negligible. I think that's one of our major goals, is looking at the impacts, whatever actions we take or recommend to the council. It's the overall impact. What will this do? Will this add a couple of lots over 300 acres? The perception of that impact may be, in my mind, is fairly minor. Somebody else that's living next to that 300 acres, it may be world changing. But I think in general, the impact that we have here, balanced against the property rights, I think it makes sense to go forward with this.
Let me ask Taylor, what are your thoughts on the question of addressing the density definition tonight versus should we put that off to a different meeting? Because is there any concern there as far as noticing?
Well, I don't have any concerns personally, and having looked at this with Tim beforehand, the primary concern that I would have is how does this affect, all the other parts of our administration, like public works and everything, but all the setback requirements are still stay the same. So this is just only affecting the calculation that allows people to use their property. For those people that are on the boundary of those edge cases where they have 10 acres exactly and this brings them to 9.9, I think it's a good fix.
Commissioners, how do you feel about addressing both tonight?
I think we address them. If council feels good with the noticing, I mean, we're not making a final decision anyway. There will be another option for people to voice their concerns to the council as well, so.
Tim, can I have you pull the language back up?
sorry, I forgot what to
Just so we can. So this was, and this is the version that I'm most comfortable with, personally, is just striking that last sentence of the underdevelopable acreage, but
It was noticed just as this chapter, correct?
Specifically the top definition.
yeah, specifically developable acreage as opposed to
Yeah.
I think that's the question. But as they relate very closely, obviously, to each other, I think what we're proposing to do is make the same change in both definitions, right? And so in this case, would we also be essentially striking that last underlined section of the density? Is that right?
That's how I see it.
Okay, that's how I would see it as well. And I don't see a compelling reason to specifically call out RU2, RU5, like in the other versions. Anybody have any other?
The RU2, RU5 is gonna be more noticeable if we allow it in them. I would, if I'm following you correctly.
I was just say maybe. I think it's
I think
really
in most of the
specific.
ones I think we've approved, there hasn't been too many, but.
I mean, it's your frontage on the road.
Yeah.
Whether it's a large development or a small development, it all comes down to how much frontage is there, how much property would have to be dedicated. And it would vary from one proposal, or from one development to another, because in some areas, that's already dedicated.
it's already owned by the, I mean, if you look through the plat map, there are areas where that right of way is already owned by the county. And there wouldn't be any dedication in some of these proposals. In others, it may be 66 feet because currently, or 33 feet, excuse me, 33 feet, because they currently own to the middle of the road. And so I think there's some variability there, but what the average citizen's gonna see is gonna be not noticeable.
I think so too, and for me, I take a big picture look at this issue in particular. This is a situation where there's a public need for that property, and it's a new condition. It's not, which is to say, and this is just leading up to our next meeting, or next topic, you know, a new situation in my mind is different than an existing situation. So when it comes to developable acreage and that sort of thing, sensitive lands or whatever, that's a condition that already exists. It's not a new condition. So, yeah, I tend to feel like there's no need to call out specific zones. I would be comfortable with approving it for all zones at this point, and then we, you know, for those of us that stick around long enough, if we do something wrong, it will come back. And we'll see it, and we'll be like, oh, we shouldn't have done that.
You know, across the street from the one that we just looked at, it's
Yeah.
maybe an RU2 that has a lot of frontage. You're looking at that Denali one on that corner.
Yeah.
Across the street is that RU2 that, for Triangle Peaks, has a lot of frontage.
I think if we do have an RU2 that comes up, Brady, it's gonna be big enough that it's noticeable. It's probably far enough from a city that we wouldn't recommend the rezone anyways. You know, if it's a 1 or 2 lot one like we've had the last couple, you're not gonna notice it.
Or
If it's a 20 lot one,
Or it's by the city.
yeah, or if it's
and
by
we're
the
gonna
city,
notice
so
it
you're not gonna
anyway.
notice anyways. It's not gonna be out in the middle of the valley where there's nothing else around it and you're gonna do 80 lots. I don't see us probably recommending approval of that to the county council anyways.
Noel, do you feel better about it?
Well, when you talk RU2, I go back to Wellsville. I think the city has a lot of input on when it comes to RU2, and we listen to it, and we should, because that's their annexation area, so kudos when the city talks. I'm kind of like Chris, you know, the roads don't bother me too much. I mean, I definitely want to see and listen to open waters, wetlands and stuff like that, absolutely, so. So yeah, I'm like Jason, the impact is probably gonna be negligible. Because in order for it to be huge, then you're gonna be talking a big piece of ground that's gonna be on the front of the road. Yeah, that's like a rectangle rather than a square, so. But then, that's the part of developing and doing it. I mean, we all know that if you're gonna do it, there's gonna be some cost to it. It's just that some people don't like that cost, but we can't burden the other taxpayer for their developments either, so. I think this gets us in a mix of, okay, right, if we've gotta do it for the roads, it's gonna be negligible, but, yeah, I'm not too worried about it right now. I mean, it'd be nice to say that, but then just as Nate's pointed out, we're not talking a great big of ground if we're talking a small piece of.
It's not 1,000 acre parcel.
Exactly.
RU2.
Yeah, so
They're very small.
negligible I can deal with. I mean, if somebody can point me to a point that this is gonna be ugly or hideous, then I'd like to think about it. Maybe we'll find that out or think about it before it gets to the council, and then the council can address it too, so.
Well, I think we've talked through this pretty good. If someone would like to make a motion, I would recommend it would be for both of these definitions.
I would make that motion to include both of the definitions of the developable acreage and the definition of
Hey, one question though. Does a railroad count on this?
Public, that's private. I would think in the definition.
Because I got situations right now that people are coming at me with the railroad, and they're not very friendly to work with.
But that's already dedicated,
They've already
right?
got the dedication,
Right.
they're not getting more.
Right, but there are some issues on there, so that's why I bring it up. I'm just saying when,
Add railroad as a.
what
as a list,
defines a
like
public
parks and
right of
sensitive
way?
lands?
'Cause
Is railroad.
Road.
public
Probably
right?
not a railroad.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
private.
private company, but your point is good.
You know,
In
when
the
we
next
gotta think of,
discussion, as we talk about sensitive areas.
yes,
If we have dedicated, an easement for
easements is what
water,
I'm thinking about.
take water through, how do those impact, that's the next discussion.
Hey,
That's the next one.
this is a recommendation to the county council.
I'll second the recommendation.
I think we already had a second.
We can have it if you want. Yeah, we did.
I wasn't sure, okay, I wasn't, make comment, I wasn't sure. You're too kind with these seconds today.
Okay, we have a motion and second to modify the definition for developable acreage and density in ordinance 17.07.04. Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Item 9. Talk us through that one too, Tim?
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Mr. Tate.
Well, I appreciate your candid discussion. It's a good discussion.
Okay, so another graphic for you. I'll be the first to admit this is not how most slopes look. They're not so square and uniform. But it allowed me to at least provide a graphic for our discussion this evening. And hopefully it's a helpful diagram. And what you're looking at is two 40-acre plots, left and right, same land area. However, one has about half the area is 30% slope. And then you see some 20% slope and flatter areas. And then you see a fairly flat piece of ground. And just for discussion purposes, in the A10 context, there are 4 lots provided on each. And the lots just run equal width through the property. And I think the point of this slide is it just explores what's the difference in the look and feel in terms of driving by or living, visiting this area, and what's the character of the area. And it still feels quite similar. It's just that one has slopes behind it, the other does not. And I did just add about 20 seconds ago a little wetland area. And I only so far we've been kind of looking at the steep slope, but did just want to invite the element of, say, a wetland, and what does that do to the look and feel and character of the area.
Before you move on to that, this isn't the current scenario, correct? Because we would take out half of the half of the acreage in the left
Good point.
parcel, and so you would only have.
You'd only have two.
lots
Yep.
in the current configuration, because that 30% slope would all be non-developable.
Appreciate that. I should have clarified that if gross density was allowed without the steep slope.
And that comes in too, because we had a case come before us that's not only slope, but it's wash or deep areas, gorges, or whatever else that, yes, and causing issues, so we've left that out before counting the acre density.
Okay?
And so I just wanted to clarify that it would be 2 lots currently how it is, just because of those steep slopes.
That's
Even
right.
though, the open space could be very similar between those two.
So that would be a good sequence to first show it as 2 lots on the left, 4 on the right, and then this slide 4 and 4.
If we, and I'm not advocating for one thing or another, but if we change the code to say, same lot, but you can't build on 30% slopes. So that's, in my estimation, that's what we're really talking about tonight, is philosophically, where do we stand when it pertains to steep slopes, other sensitive areas, and those things. Is that accurate?
Yes, and similar to your thought about what's the current code require, I think if there was wetlands on the right parcel, then we might see 3 houses there, or 3 lots. Okay, so the next slide shows an RU5 context, and we'll just state that this is if steep slopes was not a factor in determining the net density, and it was a gross density calculation. And this gets kind of interesting because it shows and granted, there could be some clustering with those, with the flatter ground, and housing could be closer together, but you'd end up with a flatter open space area.
Could develop it the same way and just have an agricultural remainder.
That's right. That's right. So it's an ag remainder versus a mountain or a hill, so there's more scenarios that could be drawn up, but this at least depicts that there is a limited concentrated area for development when you have a substantial amount of slope on ground. And this is depicting that it does start to change the equation in terms of what it looks like. But I haven't drawn up something that shows a cluster development with preserved farmable ground. Now you could argue, and I've heard it joked, that the preserved, quote unquote, preserved steep slopes is sleigh riding open space, or, maybe there's a trail or something up in there, but it's not for a otherwise conservation purpose, other than it would remain the same. So that's as far as we've gotten. I think that in Angie and my analysis and discussion, we feel that an A10 and an RU40, FR40. I take it, FR40, let me just back up. A10 seems fairly safe, but again, we haven't done enough analysis to confirm whether RU5 or RU2, what's the tipping point for too much density. We did find in Weber County that they count, I believe it's 1/4 or 25% density credit towards the steep slope areas. So they give some credit. Did I get that right, Angie? Yeah,
It would be like a 40 by 40 buildable area at minimum.
It had more rules than that, but at least the notion that they didn't give full credit for that sensitive area, but they gave partial credit, and it seemed to be about a 1-to-4 ratio, 25%.
Some counties allow, or some jurisdictions anyway, allow for building on steep slopes, correct?
I think they've tried to get away. I don't know.
I believe there was a fairly high-profile Supreme Court case in, I think it was Salt Lake County, I think it was up at Alda or in the Cotton Canyon area, where it went all the way to the Supreme Court based on that, and they said, yes, you can't build on steep slopes. It's really more philosophically what we decide we want to encourage, the direction we want to go.
Yep.
I think
And I
Weber
could
County.
count my recounting of court cases, but I remember that from one of the trainings that we went to, and talked specifically of steep slopes.
I think when we talk about the steep slope bill, one that we saw within the last year or two was out of Wellsville. I can't remember if it was 50 acres or 80 acres. Kind of runs in my mind it was a little higher because they still are able to get 3 or 4 or 5 lots off of it. But I don't know, it allows us to put more homes out there. The only problem though, I think that would be interesting, and I don't know how we could study it, the areas that are affected, whether it be that Wellsville scenario, or I don't know, I'm sure there's places in Mount Sterling, maybe Clarkston. There's actually probably more areas than we realize, but what's it gonna do? I mean, when we throw out these comparisons, when someone's looking at an RU2 or an RU5, within a certain radius, there's this many homes that fall in that. Literally, that's kind of what we're doing when we go to the steep hills, is we're just cramming more people, and even though there's more area behind them though, it's increasing the density double or what have you for the area.
Well, we do that in a lot of the A10s now, right? They have a 40-acre piece, and they'll do 4 lots on it, but they're 1 acre lots, 4 1-acre lots, and the rest of the ag remainder. So it's still, it's almost identical to what that picture is. We do it on a lot of the A10s now.
I didn't really remember A10s as much as the RU2s,
Yeah,
like
A10s.
Dwayne Williams, a lot of
A
his.
lot of the A10s are that way. They just cluster them and just keep farming the rest of it.
I think there are two parts to this equation. One is sensitive areas, and I don't know, can't speak for everybody, but I think we probably would agree that, hey, we don't want to have people building in the floodplain. We don't want to have people building in places that would be dangerous or cause a public issue, mudslides, whatever it may be. I think that's one thing that we say, hey, we don't build in sensitive areas that are dangerous or pose a risk to, we have in there endangered species, sensitive areas in one way or another. So I think that's one question. And then there's the question of density, of do we take that out of the overall calculation because you have some wetlands on your property, or you have some steep slopes. And I think this is a great graphic, because I've just seen, on social media, people are trying to sell properties, and there's a piece of property up Smithfield Canyon that's a fairly large, 100 acres, 100 plus acres of property, and it's just like this. It has frontage along Canyon Road, and then the mountainside that goes up. Well, the property hasn't sold for years because you can build 1 or 2 homes on it because it's mostly 30% slopes that are there. Would that make sense to count the density with those slopes? Because it's going to be open space. If we allowed more homes to be built along the road where we have provisions of services and all of that, how does that impact the overall thing? I think that's the question that intrigues me on this is do we look at the overall density calculation and say, you can't build on this stuff, but we're not going to penalize you because that property is going to remain open space anyway, and that's one of the main things that we've identified in our general plan is we'd like to have that open space in the field there. So that's my take on this discussion, and I'm not taking a hard stand one way or another. I think it's a great discussion that we have is, what makes sense in the overall density, and maybe we have that discussion of some counties allow building on steep slopes. I don't think, for me personally, that's not where I'd want to go, but maybe you have that discussion first and say, do we want to open up that can of worms as far as these sensitive areas, what's included there, and then have the broader discussion of density. What should we allow in the calculation? Sorry, I said a lot.
There
Can I
could,
say something here?
yep.
So Brady brought up a point, just because you're in A10 and somebody mentioned we build a house and the rest is agricultural remainder. There's some ground that doesn't even qualify as agricultural, and it's in A10. And if we go down this, we've got to be ready, because Brady brought up 2 points in Wellsville. We have the individual in Sardine who wanted to take R40 and go to A10. We said you can't do that unless you can prove that there's been agricultural there to take it to A10, right? Then we had another individual who had ground that was farmable, but it went up into the forest area, and he wanted to count that, but we didn't take it because he couldn't prove that it would have been agricultural. So to me, just like you said, there's some points here. This is going to be overlapping into some other areas that we got to be careful about, because there are some washes and some ravines out there that the only thing it's good for is pheasant hunting, and it's not agricultural. So I think we become careful as determining that just because it's an A10, that counts towards density because it wasn't farmable. Even though still, it's open space, but,
In the density bonus.
yes, because if you count that, then somebody's gonna be saying, okay, let's go into R40 and some of the others that you gotta be careful about.
I see, or it's a really good point, and maybe a value such as agriculture, valuable wildlife habitat or recreation could also be considered, but if it has maybe none of those, then why offer the density bonus? Might be
Just
similar
something
to your point.
consider. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, on the second hand, you could come across and say, well, it's range ground, so it's still agricultural, but, so you gotta be careful there, so.
yeah.
Well, and if you talk to Matt Phillips, those washes are really valuable. The more we can preserve those and make those better for stormwater stuff,
Yep.
long term is,
Oh.
Just like the canal
Yeah,
issue, we wanna
they're-
take canals out because
they're
it's.
valuable washes for more than just open space.
And I guess I've said a lot, and I should just shut up, but I also think of, are we using sensitive areas as a way to control density? What's the real purpose behind the excluding sensitive areas there? Is it to protect those areas and make sure that we're being safe there, or is it a way that we're able to, by doing that, control how much density is out there? Because I don't think that's a good tool to use. We should use our zones and our overall plan to determine, how that density should be. I think the sensitive areas should really be about the sensitive areas, and what makes sense from a safety standpoint, from a
Public health,
public
safety, and
health,
welfare.
all of those things.
Yeah, I think, I tend to lean that way too, I think, I'd rather see those areas protected and not necessarily punish a landowner, for protecting it.
Otherwise, you get the Willow Lake subdivision and they're just gonna fill all the wetlands in.
Right.
That's not in the county, so we can't have control, but if we just show those are unbuildable, don't fill them in, because they're still gonna be unbuildable. I think, and this one doesn't, I think, need a little bit more evaluation for the different areas and what it would affect, but.
I think there's a lot of discussion that
Yeah.
goes into this one, but in our overall general plan discussion of looking at density bonuses, is this a way that you can allow a density bonus and cluster our development? Here's all the wetlands in the back part of this property, or we've got a mountainside, but we cluster our development and put it along a county arterial where we have services.
And the other thing it does, in a maybe small way now, but maybe bigger way long term, is it lets us develop some of the less farmable pieces. But if we say all the ones with sensitive areas aren't developable, it just pushes you all to the prime farmland. This keeps us off the prime farmland, off the irrigated farmland in a lot of cases, and maybe pushes us to some of the ground that might be better to develop, have the farmland on the state. And it's not gonna be a huge one, but it is one that will push it over the line. A nice, flat, dry field is the only one you can develop, and it goes into the regular farmland real fast.
Might be helpful to briefly revisit this Martin rezone from August of 21, I believe. And as you recall, they had some steep slopes, which you can see on this slide. They also had source water protection zone area. But their request from A10 to RU5 was so that they could not be necessarily penalized for those sensitive areas and still achieve, I forget how many lots they wanted. 3 as opposed to, at any rate, if it could reduce the number of rezone requests from A10 to RU5 in some of these bench areas, as this one.
And it does more or less force a clustering scenario on parcels that do have sensitive. I'm also recalling, Angie, you may recall with me or help me recall, we were looking at a proposed development project up in the R40 zone, or the FR40 zone. It's a fairly large project, and I thought, had a lot of steep slopes, and it took a lot of density out of it, and I know we had a lot of discussion on that one, and it seems like they had come in asking for thinking it was no closer to
No,
Paradise.
it was,
Yeah, Paradise.
yeah. Trying to
Does that
remember.
ring a bell at all? They were wanting to cluster,
Yeah,
you
they
know,
did,
the homes
yeah.
and I can't remember if it was steep slopes.
Didn't we take from FR40 to A10?
I don't think so.
No, I think it was actually an older approval that they were looking to amend, but the county council had kind of gone into a development agreement type thing with them, that even though they didn't have the net acreage, that if they developed it this particular way, then they could get so many lots.
Yeah.
And yeah, they did come in a few years ago to try and change something on it, I don't recall exactly, but yeah, that's just,
It was a steep slope issue though, right?
Yeah.
It was taking quite
yeah.
a number
And
of
they had,
lots.
yeah, hundreds of acres.
away.
We received an inquiry not too long ago, just a few weeks, about I think it was roughly 350 acres. And the steep slopes represented maybe 40% or a third of that. And in rough calculation would suggest that gross density would allow for 8 seasonal cabins, net would be 5. And to this idea of maybe if it's developed in a pattern that's very conservation minded, then maybe the difference of 3 cabins, or maybe a bonus, who knows, to develop in a very environmentally sensitive manner. I'll tell you what, we definitely want to continue studying, and that is, what's the impact of roads, private roads through steep slopes? The potential for those to be very visually impactful and environmentally impactful is something we'll want to take a careful look at with this as well.
I have more concerns about allowing development in a steep slope than I do about having that not count towards your density.
Wasn't it Ogden, a couple of years ago, the big house crumbled? It was up on a hill.
North Salt Lake on South Lake.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Riverdale.
Riverdale as well.
I was thinking that when they built the rocks up around it and it just crumbled.
And lawsuits left and right, you know, that's where our job actually means
That's
something.
why I think it's two real discussions there, is there's the density side of it. But I think you bring up a really good point. You think of, I mean, we have some really large parcels in the valley up canyons, you know, where, thinking of the south end of the valley, where somebody may own thousands of acres, Whisper Ridge area, where you have a small area in the bottom of the canyon that is not steep slopes, but they have thousands of acres. And if we looked at the density bonus on this and said, hey, you don't have to count that, we may have the potential to put a very large development in the bottom of a canyon. Does that make sense, or doesn't it? I don't know. I wouldn't put any guesses on whether that's good or bad, but that's a potential impact.
I agree.
Of this.
And for me, I think I'd rather see that concentrated development than I would have it spread out all across the mountain.
Yeah, we've got this development in Hyde Park going in, and so this is a major road, this is 1600 east of North Logan, this is R200 south. So these are these steep slopes, and they're putting in, I don't know, 30 or 40 homes on these 40 acres. And so the road's gonna go here along this ravine, I mean, they're gonna keep it where it is, but over here, they've got this divided into these lots, and most of them, you can see where they could build, but this one sort of flag lot they've put in there, we're looking at it, and I'm like, I don't know where they're gonna build, it looks all too steep, and so I don't know if you have to say, or maybe that will come in the building code, you know, when they go to submit their building permit, and they tell them they can't build anywhere, I'm not sure what that.
There's some above Providence that in the winter, they park on the road. The house next to my nephew's, they can't get up their driveway in the wintertime. And it's only 60 feet. But, a little too steep to be building on that. With cut and fill they had to do for some of those lots.
Yeah, so I don't know, but maybe we force them into that because we have minimum lot sizes, you know, instead of squishing others, you know, getting more dense in other places. I kind of like the idea of letting them count a portion of it, you know, the 25% or up to a percentage or something.
And there could be a performance-based development standard to achieve something like that, that if the more environmentally sensitive the development is, then maybe It's less about how many units there are and more about the total impact and suitability on the site.
Just seems more subjective, hard
Yep,
to judge everybody. Well, you did this for so-and-so, and you're stopping me here, like,
it would be a more substantial code rewrite with a design review component and design criteria, yep.
Tim, and Angie, for purposes of further discussion on this, maybe, I don't know if you can pull this out of the GIS data, I'm sure you probably can, and say, how many acres of wetlands do we have? How many acres of sensitive, I guess you could probably just say,
Categorize
of sensitive slopes, and give us an idea, and realizing that, you know, the vast majority of the mountain areas are really off of, they're either federal land or, you know, it's FR 40, but in the real developable part of the valley, how much impact would this have overall? And I'm thinking wetlands, you know, we've got tens of thousands of acres in the bottom of the valley that Pacific Corp owns, part of Cutler Reservoir. Well, that's not going to be developed. I don't know if there's a way that we could get that kind of information to see kind of what the impact would be from if there was a change to this. Maybe it's not as big an impact as we think. Maybe it's bigger.
Yeah, based on the zoning, current zoning.
Sure, we could look at that, and I think based on this good discussion, we could draw up some more diagrams that we think fit some of the discussion and questions, and continue this for as long as you feel is needed as a discussion.
Your graphics there are good, but maybe show us current scenario versus if we removed.
Yep.
If we removed that language, and so they got a density bonus based on those sensitive languages.
Current code standard versus potential.
Potential changes.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments for staff on this item? Okay. So this is to be continued. Okay, so the last item on our agenda is elections. Who would like to lead that discussion? Yeah, we got to select a chair and vice chair for the coming year.
That's an unlikely excuse.
January, February, I gotta be gone this month. For those months.
I'll take the first salvo here. I would nominate Nate Dodds as chair for next year. Because he's never done it.
The newest guy.
that's what I said.
It went fast, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can still be friends, right?
After he's filled his chair.
I want to take that vote first.
You didn't call me. This is a lot easier.
So it sounds like you made a motion.
Yes, I mean,
You
nominate,
nominated.
I don't know what the proper nominated, is nomination or is it a motion, or what should we,
In this case, it would be no.
nomination?
Not thrown under the bus.
And so we wouldn't need a second on that nomination. So
You found out you couldn't, like, if you didn't have the chair or the vice, you couldn't do anything else, didn't you?
That's true.
Yeah, they had to call
Yeah,
him,
we
like,
had to-
couldn't be here, he had to step down from it for his own project. You actually need two.
There's a process. Yeah.
I'm not reliable.
I don't think nothing personal.
Good man.
Was that a nomination?
Yeah, I nominate Lane. Okay, that means then he's gotta slow down his travels, cause then the next year he'd be chairman.
Oh, I could, I'm going to babysit my grandkids out in Wyoming.
Okay, so we nominated Lane. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. We've got our chair and vice chair for next year. Do we need to, seem like there's procedural things for our secretary or is that right?
No,
that's
because there's-
Staff.
Staff is
Didn't
doing
we
that,
have
we
to,
don't have
didn't we have to take a vote
Meeting
on
schedule,
that?
or is
I
that?
think
It's in policy that you guys dictate staff to do it, and staff dictates, staff turns it over to me.
In the past, we took a vote on that, it seemed like, but.
Unless one of you wanted to.
We appreciate our secretary.
What's our agenda look like for next month?
One rezone and then lots of subdivision. And the rezone is for an industrial, near the airport.
Is that one we've seen?
Not one you've seen, but the gentleman who owns the property was in the audience for the previous rezone in that area.
Rezone near the airport.
Staff on this.
Yeah, it has existing
What's the
storage
party
sheds.
tonight
on
will
it.
be-
Oh,
You should get the county to change that, every year they miss that county Christmas.
Believe me, I've been trying. They did it twice this year.
Yes. Well, I swear they used to have them on Wednesdays, not Thursdays.
Which, from the council, thanks to all of you guys, we very much appreciate your dedication, I know you do, so.
Thank you.
We very much fought for a higher compensation, and we got struck down by state law.
Rather let you cover our gas.
Yeah. Just don't drive
Just
too far.
about, just about.
Just don't drive too far. So, thank you we very much appreciate it, so thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate staff too.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys put in a lot of dedicated hours.
Thank
to
you.
Think this thing over, it's amazing.
Thank you, and I've served with a number of different planning commissions. This is a very good planning commission. You do great work, you deliberate well together, and very analysis in your deliberations, so pleasure to serve you.
It's been great fun to serve as your chair, so.
Yeah, I have no complaints. There's nothing on here that caused me to leave. Great experience. It's been so helpful for me at my city. I mean, I feel like I've come with understanding because I've been at my city, and there's been lots of things I've taken from here back to my city, but I think it's improved them, so, thank you.
Your service. Okay, anything else?
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Oh, yeah.
Stand adjourned.